Ei, Sachsenhausen, Kolonia Gwarna, Parna, Germania richtig dicker Heil, Sachsenhausen. Wirtycie jak bambusik, trupie łebki to kaktusy Heil, es lebe Kultur Kampf.
Welcome to Descendant Stuff, a podcast by and for the descendants of Sachsenhausen prisoners working together to uncover the unanswered questions of its history. We are Jakob, Nicole, and Kelsey, three descendants of Sachsenhausen prisoners. Today, we are talking about Heinrich Feisthauer. Heinrich was arrested as part of the June campaign in 1938. He survived the concentration camp and was released in very poor health conditions in January 1939. Today, we are with Jakob Feisthauer, his great-grandson. Welcome, Jakob.
Thank you for having me here.
It's our pleasure.
Welcome.
Can you tell us something about Heinrich's life before Sachsenhausen?
Sure. Heinrich was born in the end of the 19th century. He went to school, just basic school, I think, 8 years of school. He started education in being a secretary, but he didn't do anything with it because the war started, the First World War, and he was fighting as a soldier on the East and West Front. He was several times in hospitals. That's very well documented. And he ended being a soldier protecting the border of German Reich at the end of the First World War. And he still stayed being a soldier for a couple of months.
Did he have kids or family? And, what was it like for him before World War II? What was he doing?
He started to work in a mine. I think it was a coal mine, but he didn't work underground. He worked overground. Not exactly sure what he did. It was a village close to his home place in Silesia in Germany. It's Poland today. And in this village, he met his wife. But first, they had a kid. And after having the first kid, they married. So in those days, probably not so easy. And he was sick quite a few times during the time he was working in the mine. And he was in a psychiatric hospital. I didn't know that they actually had psychiatric hospitals in those days in small villages in Germany. It's a small village, a couple of thousand people. Yeah, maybe not even living there. And they had a psychiatric hospital. He was there twice for a couple of months. 1924, he was kicked out of the mine because he was sick too long. In 1925, he had a second kid, and he started to work as a salesman for margarine. There was a company called Belk, and they produced several goods. They gave it to their salesmen all over the German Reich, distributed it by train and trucks, and those salesmen just had to deliver it to the houses of people. So it was some kind of direct marketing concept, no stores, no traders in between who could earn. So they said highest quality for a very low price. And he had a bike. Today you would say cargo bike. And he transported goods like margarine and chocolate to his customers in the surrounding. And that was kind of his job. And as he said later, he was happy with it.
Like, how did he go from there and that to Sachsenhausen?
In 1933, the Nazi Party won elections and took over power. And the plan was to get rid of all the trade with foreign countries. Germany wanted to be independent and produce stuff on their own. So since they didn't want to buy a lot of fat anymore from countries abroad, they had a problem with fat or oil. So they changed a lot of laws to make sure the fat trading would be under the control of the government. For example, they started to catch whales in close to the South Pole to get more fat. And all those ideas raised the butter and oil prices. So it was not really affordable anymore for customers to buy those products. So the Nazis introduced rebate campaigns for margin, but it was just meant for local stores, not for salesmen who went from door to door. So he was unemployed somewhere in 1933, and he went to the unemployment office and asked for jobs, but they did not give him jobs. He said later they didn't do it because he was not a member of the Nazi Party, and he complained about the Nazi Party. And once they offered him a job in street construction work, but he said, it's too difficult for me. I'm not in the shape anymore to do this work, so give me something else. But they did do it. So he was unemployed for quite some years. In 1935, he got his third child. And in 1938, he went to the unemployment office again one day. And he had to show some kind of working or unemployment card and get a stamp. He did it. And the next day in the morning at 5-something, he was arrested at his apartment, and they took him to a prison in the village next to his place. And he had to stay there for several days. And on the 23rd of June, he was brought to Sachsenhausen.
How old was he at that time when he was brought there?
39.
So what was the official rationale or justification or label given?
Well, he was labeled as so-called asocial, working shy, as many others in those days. There were 2 waves. There was one wave in April and another one in June. The April wave was conducted by the Gestapo, and the June wave by the criminal police.
Heinrich wouldn't have known about this order, but it was a national order to round up a group, like an official order to round up asocial people who were labeled in a category of asocial or work shy.
Yeah, the story of Sachsenhausen is very important to this thing. Thanks for saying it. Sachsenhausen was built to raise money.
Right.
For the SS. There was the idea of we have to raise production. There was a lack of workers in the German Reich, and it was difficult to get people to work in jobs like farming or construction work. And Hitler had his great plans to build a new capital called Germania with this very stupid 300-meter high building. What do you need for making this building? You need bricks. So they made a brick factory in Sachsenhausen. They put it close to the concentration camp because there was a waterway, so it was easy to get heavy goods away and deliver stuff. And you have prisoners from the concentration camp who can work there. So the first wave in April did not really cover the need of workers. A little bit earlier, Heinrich Himmler assumed that there might be 500,000 so-called working shy people in Germany, and his plan was to get them all to work. And I think in the April wave, all they could get was a couple of thousand people. And in June, there was the order, the one you said, every criminal police department had to get 300 so-called working shy people, no matter how, just get them.
Right, like a quota.
Yeah, like a quota. So it was not about the individual person. It was about the quota. So what did they do? They asked other authorities like the unemployment office, hey, do you have people we could use for this campaign? And in other social security offices, they asked for people who would fit in this category, in their opinion. So that's how they raised 300 people in every police department, and Heinrich was one of those guys.
Right. So they end up creating a label, and as an excuse to recruit a workforce.
Yes.
Like a stigmatized label, so that he's got this label of he was work shy, and that's the excuse to recruit forced labor.
Looking back, it's, let's say, funny that they especially took somebody who was a day before in the unemployment office asking for work.
Ironic. That is the route for him to become a prisoner at Sachsenhausen, is through this action.
Yes.
Do you know what it was like for him to enter Sachsenhausen? Do you have, how did you hear? You have so much detail that you've just described about his life, about what was happening in that moment before he came to Sachsenhausen. How do you know this story?
I know the stuff because Heinrich applied for compensation after the war was over. And the authorities were not so nice. He had to write a lot of letters, and there are quite a lot of details in the letters he wrote to the authorities. So in combination with what I know from him, it was possible to collect information from the memorial, from literature, to complete the story. It's very well documented how the June action and the April action went. Yeah, we have good sources.
I guess another irony maybe is that because he had such difficulty with compensation and was refused the compensation, he had challenges with his compensation for so long that created the opportunity for him to record his story.
I don't think he would have written it down for us as family or descendants because he probably didn't see it as important, but he just wrote it down for the reason to get money. It's about 800 pages. Astrid Ley, the vice president of the Sachsenhausen Memorial, told me that this is probably one of the most complex compensation files she's ever seen. So it's very valuable what he wrote down. He probably didn't know it when he wrote his letters to the authorities, but he left something for the future, and it's something we can learn from. Yes?
Yeah, as a descendant of a fellow prisoner, for me, that's really precious to see all of that information. We only have access to what records, if we didn't get to hear it ourselves, our family didn't get to hear it ourselves and pass it down, then we are just finding these little gems of records from different spaces. So that compensation file, did you have that growing up, or you found that as an official record somewhere?
I found it. I did have it when I was growing up. I Googled his name somewhere, and I was very sure that I wouldn't find anything interesting. He died in 64. There was no internet, and so no. But I found something in the State Archive of Lower Saxony, one of the federal states in Germany. They had some files with his name. I was like, that's weird. I contacted the archive and asked about, what is it? Can I have a look? And they told me, yeah, you have to apply here and blah, very difficult. So when I was just sick and tired of being in contact with them, and I contacted Astrid Ley from concentration camp Memorial Sachsenhausen. She sent a mail. Very soon later, I had the whole file.
Wow. So did you know that Heinrich had been at Sachsenhausen?
Yes. I knew that he was in Sachsenhausen, but I had no idea why. There were some rumors. Yeah, maybe he was a political prisoner because maybe he was a communist, or nothing really. I talked about it with my grandfather. He died 2016.
Heinrich.
No, Heinrich died in 64.
Right, got it. So he's your great-grandfather.
Yeah, great-grandfather. So I talked with my grandfather and his civilians. They couldn't tell me a lot about it. They could tell me some things, but about the reason, no. So I thought, yeah, maybe he was in the Communist Party or in the Social Democratic Party. When I figured out that he was labeled as so-called working shy, asocial, I thought, okay, maybe that's why they did not talk about it too much. Maybe not Heinrich himself, but maybe his kids were ashamed of the fact that he was labeled like this. I'm not sure if Heinrich was ashamed because he applied for compensation and he wrote about the thing.
Right, like he wrote about it freely.
Well, he was in a difficult financial situation, so he had to apply for the money. It would have been stupid not to do it. He wrote about it and he complained about the authorities by writing letters to the parliament and to members of the parliament. So he was not shy to talk about the whole thing. No.
These compensation files uncovered a lot of information about his arrest. Did it also uncover information about his time spent in Sachsenhausen?
Yes. There are some things he wrote down because he had to prove that he had health issues due to the way he was treated in the concentration camp. He had to write down what he did there. So he wrote down that he was working at Klinkerwerk, that he had to shovel sand and cut down trees. So knowing that the clinker factory, brick factory thing was just built in that time, I know that they had to cut down a lot of trees because there was a forest to make space for the brick factory, and that they had to dig out a harbor next to the channel. So cutting down trees, shovel sand, yeah, he was building the harbor. He was making space for the brick factory. He also wrote down that he was beaten down by SS guards, that he was punched with the back of a gun, and that he was choked until it became black in front of his eyes. He's naming 2 SS guards. One is Burgdalla, very famous, very cruel guy who used to be guard in Sachsenhausen, SS guard. So he's also naming other prisoners, 2 guys who came along from his village. They arrived with him there at the same day, but they died. He's writing about the treatments he got in the hospital in Sachsenhausen. He received massages, weird, and radiation therapy, and he is able to name some medication he received there.
And other than that, it's only through these records that you know about his time at Sachsenhausen. Otherwise, your family hadn't talked about this.
There was something from my great aunt. She told that he was tortured, that he was placed in a room in the dark, and they dripped water on his head. Sitting there and being dripped with water makes you crazy, whatever. I talked about it with Astrid Lane. She told me this probably did not happen that way. At least she doesn't know about this torture method in Sachsenhausen. Maybe it happened anyway, but she said other methods for torturing used to be used in those days. So I have no idea.
What other kinds of files have you found since? So you have the compensation file, and that gave you a lot of information. Are there other files that you've come across and been able to uncover more information since obtaining that?
From Heinrich, I just have the compensation file, and I found the release certificate. That's it. And other information I just discovered in literature, like the book from Harry Naujuk. He was the oldest, most experienced prisoner in the block who was in charge of the prisoners in the block. And he describes the evening when Heinrich arrived at the campsite very well. So we know very well what happened that day. So mostly it's his stuff combined with the sources from literature and the museum, what's completing the whole thing.
How would you describe, based on what you've read on that record of what happened that day, what happened that day?
In June, it was a couple of days when prisoner groups arrived at the campsite every day. Special trains.
And this is the quota of 300 per
district, exactly. So they had special trains from some cities. So they collected those 300 people and brought them with special trains to Sachsenhausen. So the train arrived in Sachsenhausen. They had to walk to the campsite.
How long was that distance?
2.2 kilometers.
So not just down a ramp.
No, but probably they did not arrive at the regular train station, so probably they actually walked down a ramp. I have no idea.
I just mean, it wasn't they didn't just arrive at the front door of Sachsenhausen. They had a train from somewhere.
They walked in, and as an introduction in the camp life, some prisoners were just picked. Some were picked by counting, like every 10th prisoner, or picked randomly. They were forced to bend over on a special device made for torturing and got 25 hits with a stick on their body somehow. Some of those beating ceremonies were done by the concentration camp commander, and some were done by his guards. This ceremony used to happen every evening. What we know is that Heinrich went into the camp, had to stand in a line for a long time, and that he experienced that people were picked just randomly or by counting, and probably was scared that he would have been picked. Maybe he was picked, I don't know, to bend over on this torture device, tied up to this device and being beaten up by an SS guard. So in case he didn't experience it himself, he was watching this cruel ceremony and probably got a very good idea how the next weeks, month, or whatever would look like in case he would survive it.
Right. So this is like a common practice that the camp did for new inmates, was to make a demonstration and set the tone of what life in the camp would be like when they first entered.
At least it used to be in those days with the June campaign. Yeah, I have no idea about other prisoner groups at other time periods, but I think we can be pretty sure that they were not treated in a good way.
And you said he did survive. He did survive Sachsenhausen.
He did.
Do you have information about his release?
Yes, actually he should have left the concentration camp on the 27th of January, 1939.
So what was the date he entered again? He entered at
23rd of June, 1938.
And you're saying, and then fast forward to 1939.
January 27, 1939. He was supposed to be released, but there is a handwritten note on the file saying that he would remain in the hospital. When he left the concentration camp, he had tuberculosis. So I assume that he was in a very poor health condition on the 27th, that he was not able to leave the camp, because who would stay in a camp voluntarily?
And what was the reason he was supposed to be leaving at that time?
I think since the whole thing was meant to get people there to work, when they probably realized that he was sick and was not a very productive worker, because otherwise he probably would have worked in street construction work earlier before. They didn't have economic benefit from keeping him there anymore, I think. And since, at least with him, it was not about killing him in the first place because he was a political opponent or he didn't fit in the race theory of the Nazis. I think in the concentration camp, when they were just someone lucky not to have to deal with him anymore.
Yeah.
Of course, they also could just have killed him, and but I think in those days that was not the standard procedure to get rid of people. So when he was released, he had to travel home by train somehow, and his doctor saw him the next day, or like 1 day after he arrived at home, and he diagnosed tuberculosis and sent him into a hospital because of his terrible health condition. His daughter told me that he somewhere in the evening arrived, and she was very scared because there was a strange guy knocking at the door during the night. And when he entered, there was a strange guy, somebody she didn't recognize anymore because he was skinny and in just terrible health condition. So she did not realize it was her father. He was sick for a long time, and he suffered from not being able to sleep, suddenly waking up during the night, being screaming and being scared in case the Nazis thought they could somehow make a strong working guy from him. Well, before he was in the camp, he was able to work, for example, in the margarine business. And when he returned from the concentration camp, he was just not able to work anymore. So I'm not sure what their goal was, but they didn't make him productive with the time in the concentration camp.
What questions do you still have about him and his life and his time in the camp?
It would be very interesting someone to find a picture where you would see hundreds of people shoveling sand, and you would discover him somewhere. And I think this is still possible, to find a picture or to find information about a person who was there with him, has more information about it. In general, I have the story.
I think all of us have this. I don't know. If I really relate to wanting to find my relative in the pictures.
Every museum visit, every book that I read or documentary I look at, I do the same. I'm like scouring pictures and footage for both of my grandparents. You know, the ones who the relatives that I had who I knew what they looked like. I'm always looking.
And for me, it's irrational. I have a single photo of this person, my relative, when he was in his 30s. And then I have no photo of him from when he's 60 years old. How could I even possibly recognize what he might look like as a prisoner in the camp? But I still irrationally scan the faces looking for his prisoner number. Like maybe that would give me some... like I want to know more, have more evidence of my family member that I have such tiny little scraps of evidence for. It's interesting that all of us, it doesn't matter, I feel like, Jakob, you're rich with information about Heinrich, and it doesn't feel very rich in the end, your small pieces that you have.
I know that I have, in comparison to other descendants, I have a lot of information. In his letters, he is describing how bad he is treated by the German authorities, who are not willing to pay for compensation. It would be so great not to read about the stupidness of the authorities, but about what he experienced in the camp. Whatever. Yeah, I have a lot of information in comparison to other ones. And from the category so-called working shy asocials, he is one of the very few who actually wrote a lot, because a lot of those people who used to be labeled as working shy or asocial, they were not able to write or not able to express what they experienced, or they were just killed and ashamed. So I think in the end, he is one of the very few of those about 8,000 something prisoners who wrote down quite some things. And I can be very happy that I found the file. Yes.
I think that's another thing that we all have in common, is that we have these just pieces that help us to understand some of the facts and the data and the information behind the story, but we all still have this desire to uncover more information about the experience of life that our ancestors went through.
And what is something that I'm hearing and understanding from you, Jakob, is how special it was that Heinrich did not, for whatever reason, he might have felt shame, but he allowed himself to document all of that. He pushed and he wrote to Parliament, and he did not get silenced by that shame, and wrote all of that documentation and had some dignity in self.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think the way he is talking with the German authorities about his compensation shows how he probably also talked with the authorities during Nazi time. He was somebody who spoke out if he didn't like something. He complained about people if they did do their job the way he thought they had to do it by law. So I think he was civilized in the days after the First World War, the first German democracy. So the way he was acting is the way we want people in a democracy to act. We want people to not just follow everything. We want them to ask questions and to make sure the state does what he has to do. The Nazis did not like this way of behavior at all. But after the war, he continued, and that was very good. And after the war, the situation with the compensation laws, they were a little bit difficult. First of all, there was no Federal Republic of Germany. There was just the state of Lower Saxony. And after a long time, he was recognized by the state of Lower Saxony as a victim of the Nazis. So that was very good because he received a small compensation for the time in the concentration camp. It was about 41% of the working income. Probably the work he did in the concentration camp was way harder than a regular job. So why just 41%? Whatever. When the new federal law came up, he was not recognized anymore as a victim of the Nazis. But at least for a while, he had a little bit of compensation. And for a little while, he was officially recognized as a victim of the Nazis. Later, not anymore.
There's so many layers to all of this. On a personal note, how has Heinrich's story affected your life?
I think it just triggered a general interest in the topic of the time during National Socialism and about their crimes and what people had to go through. The moment I had the files from the compensation procedure, it made me to dive in deeper into this topic and to spend quite some time transcribing all his handwritten letters to actual readable German letters.
Right. So just because you found those files whenever you found them doesn't mean that they were some kind of organized, typed thing that you could just read. You had to decipher his handwriting.
Yeah, I had to learn the old handwriting letter thing, Sütterlin and Deutsche Kurrentenschrift.
And what was the story about him growing up? Like when you think about how this has affected your family, your life, was it known and discussed openly in your family that he had been in Sachsenhausen and that he was an asocial? Or did he talk about being a prisoner, and did his children and, the people of your family, did they openly discuss what happened to him?
Maybe his children knew more than they talked about. That's possible. But it was not talked about the thing that he was so-called asocial. I'm not sure if his children knew. Maybe they did. I don't know. Officially, he was a prisoner in concentration camp. Yeah, okay, but that's it.
And nobody knew why. There was that kind of rumor about maybe he was a communist, maybe something like that.
I was never doubting that he was a victim. Even in case he would have been a criminal, that's not a reason. So in case somebody is a criminal, there has to be a trial. There has to be a judge sentencing somebody to something based on a law. But concentration camps were concentration camps and not prisons. So, no.
Yeah, I think that's also an important distinction that I'm just kind of uncovering in reading about when people tell stories about their experience in the concentration camp and they say, there were criminals inside the camp with us. And then I'm realizing, no, there aren't convicted criminals. Everyone is...
Exactly.
They might be accused of a crime, but nobody in a concentration camp, it's not a prison. No one is a convicted criminal. It's just another label.
Yes, exactly.
And then that must have hung over you, over your family, just that question mark of what was his reason. And so you were the person, you were the uncoverer, you were the discoverer of the reason.
Yes.
And how did your family react to your discovery?
They are not as obsessed about the thing as I am. My siblings, they ask questions. So, but that's it.
So there's one of us in every family.
Yeah, the one passionate person and the rest are kind of casually curious.
Like you said, Jakob, they say it's interesting. Thank you for sharing this information. I never would have known this otherwise. Thank goodness you're doing this because I could never do this. And then it's on to the next, it's not the sharing of the obsession of uncovering as much as we can. But I guess that's why we're here together, right? Because we're the ones that are looking to uncover these things. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And it's so much. And I know there's so much more still. probably to talk about, and even still more that you can uncover over time as you continue researching. I really appreciate you sharing all that with us today.
I have one closing question. In this podcast, because we're trying to share stories and like piece together the information and share it as a collective so that we can understand from each other, what is something that you would want to know from other prisoner experiences or from our collective knowledge that you haven't pieced together, but that you might want to, a question you might have for our collective that you would want to get answered?
I'm very interested in compensation files. I had to fight myself through a lot of compensation stuff, very boring, but at some point it turned and became interesting because I started to understand the way they were thinking in the days after the war was over. All the stuff was put into bureaucratic words to explain something really terrible. That's something what was already done during the war while talking about prisoners of concentration camps. And apparently they continued to do so after the war was over.
And so what you are hoping maybe from other people's compensation files is to have a better understanding of the impact or the process so you can see Heinrich's experience. Like that can inform your understanding of Heinrich.
Not understanding Heinrich because I think I mostly understood him. It's more about understanding the society in those days. I think there was just a mindset, war is over, Nazis are very bad, Hitler, very, very bad boy, yeah. But some things were quite okay. Like Autobahn, Nazis did Autobahn. And yeah, okay, the working shy people, it was good to be a little bit hard on them, and because they were lazy. So yeah, you have to work. It's good to push a little bit on them. So I think it was maybe a way to excuse the past, why people went along and supported, because in case there are still some good things, it can't be so bad. And it's very common to pick people who are shy to work and not willing to work and being lazy. So it's very easy to pick on the very poor people on the lowest level of society.
Thank you.
Sachsenhausen, błogosławiony raju, wszak wielbi Ciebie ludzkość, Heil, Sachsenhausen. A jak będę jutro wzdychał lewą nóżką, ci zawtikam. Heil, es lebe